The close of the 12th century found the region of Occitania, or Languedoc, in southern France, a vibrant anomaly in medieval Europe. Governed by powerful independent counts like the Count of Toulouse, Raymond Saxe, it was a land defined by tolerance, wealth and culture. Its language, the Languedoc, gave rise to the troubadours, whose poetry celebrated courtly love and skepticism toward authority. In this environment of intellectual freedom, a spiritual movement took root, offering a radical alternative to the established Roman Catholic Church. They were known to outsiders as the Albigenses, but to themselves they were simply good Christians. History remembers them as the Cathars. The Cathar faith was built on dualism, the belief in two eternal opposing gods. The good God ruled the spiritual realm, responsible for souls and salvation. The evil God, whom they identified with the biblical Satan, was the creator of the material world, flesh, possessions, war, and the institutional church. Because the physical world was inherently wicked, the Cathars rejected everything physical: the cross, the sacraments of baptism, and communion, and the very concept of the incarnation of Christ. If Christ was divine, he could not have taken a human body. Cathar followers were divided into two groups. The vast majority were the credentes, believers who lived normal lives but were expected to eventually receive the consolamentum, a spiritual baptism that purged sin. Those who had received it were the perfecti, the spiritual elite who lived ascetic lives, adhering to strict veganism, perpetual chastity, and itinerant preaching. They were the visible saints of the region, and their moral rigor shone in stark contrast to the often corrupt local Catholic clergy. This contrast earned them immense local support, attracting nobles, merchants, and peasants alike. To the Roman Church, this was not mere deviation, it was a mortal, cancerous heresy. If the material world was evil, then the Church's very foundations collapsed. The entire structure of the priesthood, the sacraments, and the physical relics, the very tools of salvation, were dismissed as the creations of the evil god. For years, popes had dispatched missions and legates to root out the heresy, but in the liberal south, they were met with indifference or hostility. The counts protected the Cathars, sometimes even sharing their beliefs. The stage was set for the greatest religious conflict of the 13th century under the leadership of Pope Innocent III. A brilliant and formidable political operator, Innocent III saw himself as God's direct representative on earth, empowered to correct kings and extinguish spiritual threats. He realized diplomacy had failed. When his key papal legate, Pierre de Castelnau, was assassinated near Saint-Gilles in January 1208, Innocent III had the casus belli he needed. He immediately declared a full-scale crusade, not against Muslim enemies in the Holy Land, but against fellow Christians in the heart of Europe. The political motives were thinly veiled. The wealthy lands of Occitania lay tantalizingly close to the domains of the French king, Philip II, who eagerly lent his support. More importantly, the northern French barons saw an opportunity for plunder and vast territorial gain in the culturally distinct south. The conflict was immediately transformed from a spiritual correction into a ruthless act of northern French conquest against the independent culture of Occitania. The promise was simple: 40 days of service, and the Crusaders could claim the heretics' land. In the summer of 1209, a huge army of northern knights and mercenary soldiers descended upon Occitania. The Count of Toulouse, Raymond VI, desperately tried to save his domain by publicly submitting to the Pope, but the machine of war had already been set in motion. The first major target was the city of Béziers. On July 22, 1209, the Crusaders, numbering perhaps 15,000, stormed the town. The papal legate, Arnaud d'Amaury, was asked how to distinguish the Catholics from the heretics. His reported reply crystallized the brutality of the entire campaign. "Kill them all, God will know his own." The resulting massacre was instantaneous and indiscriminate. Up to 20,000 citizens, men, women, and children, Catholic and Cathar alike, were slaughtered inside the Church of the Madeleine and in the streets. The city was then thoroughly looted and burned. The atrocity at Béziers sent a clear, terrifying message: resistance meant annihilation. The army then moved to Carcassonne, a heavily fortified city holding another 15,000 people, including many refugees from Béziers. The siege was brutal but brief. When the Count of Carcassonne, Raymond Roger Trencavel, attempted to negotiate, he was seized and imprisoned. Lacking water and leadership, the city surrendered, but only the women and children were allowed to leave, stripped of their belongings. Trencavel later died in a dungeon, likely murdered. The immediate violence gave way to calculated cruelty. After the early victories, the papal legate needed a permanent military leader. He found him in Simon de Montfort, a minor but fiercely devout French lord of iron will and ruthless efficiency. Montfort was invested with the captured lands and became the military engine of the crusade. The conflict entered a protracted, grinding phase, less a crusade and more a territorial war of conquest. Montfort was relentless. The most significant example of his brutality was the siege of Lavore in 1211. After capturing the town, Montfort hanged the local lord and drowned his sister in a well. Then, in an act designed to be a definitive example of justice, he had the local Cathars perfecti, around 400 individuals, dragged out, thrown into a pit, and burned alive. For the first time, a large group of heretics were executed solely by burning, setting a grim precedent for the future. Montfort, though a brilliant commander, was constantly struggling to hold the conquered territories. His authority was challenged, and the local lords, led by the defiant Raymond VI of Toulouse, fought back in a campaign of bitter attrition. Eventually, the crusade reached the capital of the south. In 1218, during the siege of Toulouse, the city forces managed to kill Simon de Montfort with a stone from a mangonel, a brief shining moment of southern defiance. Montfort's death did not end the war, but it changed its nature. The French crown, now fully invested, took direct control. King Louis VIII and eventually Louis IX launched royal campaigns that cemented the conquest. By 1229, the Treaty of Paris formally annexed the county of Toulouse and most of Occitania into the French crown. The age of southern independence was over. With the military phase complete, the systematic destruction of the Cathar faith began. This transition was marked by the establishment of the Papal Inquisition in the 1230s. Unlike the earlier crusading armies, the Inquisition was a permanent, specialized judicial body designed not for killing armies, but for rooting out hidden belief. The inquisitors operated with chilling efficiency. They offered the accused a choice: confession and penance, often a public humiliation, wearing yellow crosses or forced pilgrimage, or a refusal to confess, which resulted in trial, excommunication, and almost inevitable burning. The psychological terror of the Inquisition was far more effective than military action in destroying the social structure that had supported Catharism. Neighbors testified against neighbors, and the pressure to conform was immense. The final symbolic act of resistance occurred at the fortress of Montségur. Perched on a dramatic pinnacle in the Pyrenees, Montségur served as the last sanctuary and spiritual center for the Cathar leadership. After a long siege, the fortress fell in 1244. Over 200 perfecti who refused to recant were dragged down the hill and burned en masse in a field at the base of the mountain, a site known today as the Prat dels Cremats, the Field of the Burned. The Albigensian Crusade stands as a tragic watershed moment in European history. Its consequences were profound and permanent. Politically, it led directly to the annexation of Occitania by the French crown, effectively ending the independence of the South and drastically increasing the power and size of the Kingdom of France. This unified France would dominate the continent for centuries. Culturally, the vibrant, tolerant civilization of the Languedoc was crippled. The troubadours, once celebrated, were silenced. The language and distinct legal traditions of the South were gradually suppressed by Parisian culture and law. Demographically, while the total population of Occitania was not annihilated, the massacres at Béziers and the ongoing military campaigns caused massive localized devastation, famine, and displacement. The old, powerful noble families were replaced entirely by northern French barons, fundamentally restructuring the region's hierarchy. Most importantly, the Crusade set a terrifying precedent. It showed that the papacy was willing to unleash Christian armies against fellow Christians for religious and political aims. It established the Inquisition as a permanent, systematic weapon of ideological control, a tool that would haunt Europe for the next 5 centuries. By the start of the 14th century, the Cathar faith, the spiritual movement that dared to challenge the very nature of the material world, was utterly extinguished. Its destruction ensured the unchallenged spiritual and temporal dominance of the Roman Church over medieval life.